Welcome back to the Capes and Tights podcast right here on capesandtights.com. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. This episode is once again brought to you by our friends over at Galactic Comics and Collectibles in Bangor, Maine. You can visit them at galacticcomicsandcollectibles.com. This episode is Zac Thompson, comic book writer of books such as Nature's Labyrinth, Cable, Ka-Zar Lord of the Savage Land, Yondu, Hunt for the Skinwalker, Cemetery Kids Don't Die, Project Riese, The Dregs, as well as the currently being released Into the Unbeing, Blow Away, and the upcoming release of The Body Trade in September, as well as a prequel to the Alien Romulus book, movie that's coming out here in August, but the book will come out in October. This episode, we packed a bunch of stuff in, talking to Zac about all the comics he's written and a little bit about why Zac got into writing and the things that he stands for and believes in these books that he's writing as well. So check this out. This is Zac Thompson. But before you do, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, all that stuff. Rate, review, subscribe over on Apple and Spotify and everywhere you get your podcasts, as well as visit us at capesandtights.com. This is Zac Thompson, everyone. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Zac. How are you today?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm glad we were able to set this up. We were back and forth a little bit on trying to get this going. But like I said before we started recording, you're a very busy person. So I understand that. And then what's actually kind of funny is I moved it around on you, having it come closer because we can get this out a little earlier. And then I actually had to cancel a couple episodes because I just got over COVID.
Oh, wow.
So it's been a fun like 10 days or so. I got it. I tested positive a week ago Thursday, and then my wife and my 4-month-old and my 3-year-old all got it over the weekend. That weekend, from me probably. And so we've been it's been a crazy household for the past 10 days or so.
Oh man, wow. Is everyone feeling better now?
Everybody's great now. It's awesome. It's definitely a different experience than 4 years ago. Obviously, nowadays it's just I don't want to get anybody else sick. You know what I mean? Like I don't. I don't want to go out and just like cough on people and stuff like that. Otherwise, we know we're going to make it through. It's going to suck for a couple of days, but other than that, it's not too bad. But yeah, I saw people coming out of San Diego getting it, and then like other conventions and things like that. And I'm like, this is just not fun. It just sucks to get it, but like, once you get past it, everything's fine.
Yeah, you just kind of have to like lay down for a week and feel better.
Yes. And the worst is, actually ended up happening at a great time because my wife's aunt watches my kids. And she had surgery last week. So it was going to be kind of like a hybrid week of like taking my kids to work with me and so on. And luckily it was that same week. So it was able to just be like, okay, I'm home for the week. We're going to sit here, relax and stuff like that. I read some comics. It's sucky thing is though, trying to concentrate during that time, like when you actually are sick. I watched the first 2 seasons of West Wing. I was isolated in my room. I was like, I need something that's just like, I don't know. I got too frustrated with it. I had to turn it off. But I was like, my wife's like, oh, it's a good chance for you to read. And I'm like, I can't concentrate enough on, like, I'll be able to read, but I won't be able to like ingest and digest the stuff that I read. So I got a little behind on my reading, but we're here to talk comics and stuff like that. So it's pretty good. And you're actually not that far from me. I'm in Maine. And you're in PEI, yeah. So
So we're actually pretty close, yeah.
We're neighbors here, as closest as neighbors can be in Northeast Canada and Northeast United States of America. So we're like
definitely
when you're like 6 or 7 hours from each other, we're like neighbors in this area of the country. I just had a couple of my coworker and a family friend just visit PEI. I was like, you guys are a travel destination right now.
Yeah. So it's like a huge like tourist destination. I was going to call it a trap, but I mean it's definitely like I grew up here, so it's sort of like very like normalized to me, but it's like, really beautiful beaches, lots of seafood, that kind of thing. So people come from all over to hang out here.
And I mean I haven't been to Canada in I don't know years. I was supposed to go in March of 2020. I work, my day job is I'm a graphic designer and creative director for a brewery. I design basically like beer can labels and things like that. And we had a beer event in Canada scheduled for the end of March of 2020, which got canceled and never rescheduled. So I didn't get a chance to, and then I had a kid and another kid. And so it's been crazy, but yeah. We're here to talk comics and you're a comic creator and you've been doing this for a number of years now. You've worked for a number of different publishers, but like, were you a comic book reader as a young kid, or did you come into it late in life? Like, how did you get into reading comic books and collecting comics?
So yeah, I definitely came into it at a younger age. Like, I joke, but like the big thing that like got me hooked was reading my mom's Archie digests. She had like a huge like box of them, and I just sort of like found them one time and found them really easy to read when I was really young. Like it's probably only 5 or 6, and just it's just drama, high school crap, but like I just found that really engaging. And then from there, my older brother collected comics, and this was probably like during Age of Apocalypse, that kind of thing was going
Mhm.
on. So I was reading all of his back issues. None of them made sense to me, but I was sort of just picking up things and reading them randomly. And then sort of like I remember the first thing I remember like collecting was Spawn. I was kind of the perfect age for Spawn. I was like 8 when that series was really
Mhm.
kicking off, and I just thought Spawn was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life, right? So I was like part of the McFarlane Toys fan club, buying all kinds of Spawn action figures and comics, and I was like, the kid who's like mailing in the UPC so I could get like the exclusive McFarlane Toys like Toy of the Year or whatever. So
Mhm.
like yeah, I got hooked pretty quick.
And then obviously you now are a comic writer, and it's you're a very number in a large number of issues out there right now. If you look at your League of Comic Geeks or things like that, you have a big bibliography of what you've written
Yeah.
for various different publishers. What made you wanted to come into writing the comic books? Like obviously, I think all of us have our mindset on like we want to do something in comics if we're a huge comic book fan. But like, what led to writing? Was it because you were just not very good at drawing, or?
I mean, I'm definitely not very good at drawing, but it's sort of like a weird sort of set of circumstances where um in 2011, I decided to go to film school. So I was like, I'm gonna start screenwriting. At the same time, the New 52 is kicking off. I had been like a lapsed comic book reader for probably about a decade at that point. Started picking up New 52 stuff. Saga comes out a year after that, and I'm like fully hooked again. I'm going every Wednesday. I'm bringing people from film school with me to the comic shop, getting everyone else involved. At the same time, I'm working on a screenplay and trying to figure out how to make a movie. I ended up, working on a film in 2012 and writing a film with a group of like 4 different directors at film school. Produced the like third feature film that my film school ever made. And in doing that, kind of walked away from it and went like, I don't know about this because there was so many, it takes like 100 people to make a movie,
Mhm.
and there's so many cooks in the kitchen that you start to kind of go like, oh man, I really didn't get to realize the vision that I wanted to realize. At the same time, because I grew up in PEI and it was very remote here, there wasn't really comic conventions or anything. So
Mhm.
I'm over in Vancouver. I'm going down to Emerald City Comic Con, um, and I'm on the bus coming back, and there's a guy sitting beside me with a drawing of Dead Man from Jeff Lemire, like a commission from Jeff Lemire. And so I sit beside him, started talking to him, and that ends up becoming my co-writer, Lonnie Nadler. That's how him and I met on the bus back from Emerald City. I start talking to him about the screenplay that I'm working on. Turns out he's going to the same film school. He's just in a class ahead of me, and we had never seen each other or spoke. We get talking. We both realize we love comics. But 6 months after we graduate, we go, well, what if we took this idea for the screenplay that I had and deconstruct it, take the
Mhm.
core premise, which was ended up becoming our first book, The Dregs, which is like I had this idea about a homeless detective in Vancouver because we grew up in, or sorry, we went to school in this area of Vancouver called the Downtown East Side, where it's quite infamous, where there's like a homeless population that's sort of allowed to sort of just live their lives on this like 8 square block radius in the city. And drug use is sort of unregulated.
Mhm.
There's a whole lot of it's just a crazy place. And again, I grew up in a very isolated little island, so I'm going to school out there being like, what the fuck is going on? Like,
Yeah.
this is crazy. And so it just really stirred something in me. So Lonnie and I started to put that together, and we met Eric Sawadsky, who ended up drawing the Dregs. He was a local artist. At the same time as we were like thinking about jumping into comics, we had been reviewing comics for Bloody Disgusting, who doesn't review comics anymore, but that's
No.
sort of what we were doing at the time. So we were very involved, like going every Wednesday, huge pull lists, reviewing comics when they came out and talking to local people. And by talking to local people and kind of getting involved in our local scene, we started to go like, hey, we have some ideas. Let's see if we can just put together a 5-page pitch. So we did. We kind of waited a year and a half, and then submitted it to every single publisher that we could possibly get. Got nothing, like, crickets pretty much across the board. But in Emerald City 2016, we had sent it to Black Mask, and the guy who ran Black Mask caught us and he said, hey, can you come over here for a second? I just want to talk to you guys. And he said, I looked at your pitch. Let's do this. Let's make this comic. And we were like, is this are we like, is this happening? And he was like, yeah, let's make it. So like we sort of, like we basically just made a 5-page comic and showed it to everyone. And I think like I get asked this a lot, but like the thing that we did that I think made sense and like kind of got us into the industry was we kept showing up every year. We'd show up to cons and be like, I have a new thing. Like, I still want to do this. And eventually people go, okay, these kids aren't going away.
Mhm.
Like and so, and also having the wherewithal to sort of get a team together, make a thing, and have it like be as professional as you possibly can make it on your own terms. And yeah, you got to pay people out of your pocket and you
Mhm.
got to like invest some money, and some time. But at the end of the day, the reality is like you don't usually get led into any creative industry
Mhm.
unless you prove that you can do it yourself. So yeah, I just sort of like I had my eye on the prize when I started to realize like, okay, comics, you can just get 5 people together
Yep.
and make your thing. And after making a movie with 100 people and seeing how chaotic that was, I was like, I need to go the other way.
It is true, and it's one of those in creator owned things. You have a little bit more say on the whole overall arching thing too. Whereas a movie, there's a lot more other people saying what you can and cannot do. I mean, budgets aren't really they're a thing in comics because obviously there's marketing budgets, there's all, but there's not like a 22 page comic book basically depending on print materials costs the same to make at different publishers. It's not like you know
Yeah.
Marvel's using some sort of special ink that's going in these things. Like their costs about the same. So like there's not a budget in that sense either. So it's just like getting these people together, making sure everybody's happy with what they're doing. It's a lot easier in that sense. It's obviously not an easy thing. I hate saying the word easy when I talk about creating comics
No.
because it's not easy. But yeah, I understand what you're saying there. Yeah, 100 people versus about 5 people, and it's a little bit easier to swallow and get that there. But yeah, I mean, the Dregs was that 2017, you said?
Yeah,
Was when it actually
2017.
when we actually dropped at Black Mask, and then it's just been you've been haven't stopped working since, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, so like, was it you right after that did the Cable series, right? You did 5 issues of Cable.
Yeah, so I mean I joke, but like we got thrown into the fire really quickly because issue 3 of the Dregs came out and was out on shelves, and that was like June of that same year. And Lonnie and I worked at the same day job, so we would like hide and write comics basically while on a corporate payroll.
Yeah,
And um my phone rings and it says Marvel Entertainment New York City, and it's like my cell phone, and
yeah,
I was just like, so I answered it, and it was Axel Alonso, and was like, hey, like, do you have time to chat? And so I like took Lonnie aside. We like booked a meeting room and we talked to Axel, and he was like, hey, I want you to come write at Marvel. And we had like, the reverse of this is that like we had just met him in New York like a couple months earlier,
hmm
just like said hi to him,
yeah.
gave him our books, didn't think anything of it, like we were like, this is definitely not going anywhere. And then it took about 2 months, but he gave us a call, and he was like, hey, come right here. And we thought, okay, we'll get a 10-page story.
hmm
And he put us on Cable, right away. And the funny thing is like Ed Brisson, who was writing Cable before us, was a local Vancouverite at the
Mhm.
time. So we were able to kind of like call him and be like, I guess we're taking over Cable from you. And he was like, what the hell? Like you guys have been doing this for like a year. Like, and so, but it was cool because it was like sort of just we were thrown into it and learned a lot in that early like first year, year and a half, because it was like, that's not many people's story, right? Is
Yeah.
like writing one book and getting thrown into the deep end. So in a lot of ways, it was cool because you get to learn so quickly, but in the other side of it, it's like I 2018 just feels like a blur in
Yeah.
my head. Like I'm just
Yeah.
like I don't know where that year went.
I mean, it could have turned you off from comics, like writing comics in general too. Like that being, pushed into the fire so quickly could have stressed you out and could have pushed you farther away from wanting to write comics too. So like I could see that like both sides of that. But yeah, it's pretty cool. I guess the guy, people over at Marvel really just needed a Canadian to continue the Cable series. Is that
Yeah,
what it
yeah, I
was? They're
guess
just
so.
like, okay, we got
Yeah.
to go. Ed's not gonna do it anymore, so we need to get Zach and Lonnie on that so they can get that get that Cable story written. No, but more recently, you've got, and I want to touch really quickly. You got Alien Romulus coming out, the prequel, but I want to get to that at some point. But so you are, it's a Marvel property,
Yeah.
in a sense. It's obviously not, Marvel proper. It's a licensed property, but you're doing a lot of creator-owned stuff now, and so like you obviously started with creator-owned with the Dregs, but like, um, is it just something that you really just want to tell your stories now? Just to list off a few for this year, you did Cemetery Kids Don't Die, Blow Away,
Yeah.
Into the Unbeing, and then you've got the body trade coming here pretty
Yeah.
soon too. But like, is it just something that you've got a lot of stories to tell, or is it something you really want to do? Is the creator owned side of things? What's the difference on doing creator owned versus DC Marvel?
I think like to be perfectly honest, like describing like in 2018 we were thrown into superhero comics,
Yeah.
and then for one way or another, I kind of stayed doing that for about 4 years. And then after that time, we kind of go, it works at such a crazy pace. Like anyone who works in superhero comics will tell you, it's like a sprint. You're sort of just like, and your creator own books are a marathon. You're really taking your time. You're pacing yourself. And after 4 years of doing that, I was like, I can't do it anymore. Like, not that I don't want to do it anymore. It's just that I felt I think you see a lot of creators do it where they do like spurts of big two work and then they kind of take a step back. And for me, I was just like, I all I was doing was like reading Marvel back issues and sort of like just fully immersed in this world. And I wasn't necessarily thinking about the literature that got me intrigued in telling stories or the films that I was passionate about that sort of like started me on this road. So I wanted to take a step back and just sort of like look at, okay, if I only did original stuff, what would it be? And then it sort of like snowballed where I'd set some stuff up and then like I had more people ask and more people ask and more people ask. And then before I knew it, I was like, well, I have a whole year worth of original stuff. So I'm just gonna kind of ride this and very specifically like not do any big two at that time. So I can just sort of like roll them into one another. Part of the plan this year was always that when one finished, another one would start. So there's something on the shelf all year long with my name on it that's original.
Not that you plan this way, because obviously the publishers of your work you pitch stories to, or they come to you or whatever. But your four big series this year that your creator own are all on four different publishers. Is this a thought out thing? Like, is this something that you'd like to have happen because of previous experience with having a lot of stuff at one publisher and then having something not go so well? Does it now
Yeah,
have it so that I know James Tiny and the Force has mentioned something before about the idea of having also multiple marketing teams technically working on books, because now you have Oni, Boom, Dark Horse, Mad Cave, all working towards publishing your book instead of one house.
yeah, and I think the thing like so when my previous like publisher sort of imploded, I had some other creators sort of take me aside and be like, don't do that again. Like sort of just like realize that there's so much strength in perspective that comes from working with multiple different publishers as well. Because like there's just certain things that certain publishers do better than
Yeah.
than others. And like I don't think you can find any publisher that does everything perfectly, but I do think you can find a way to create relationships with all of them so they're sort of playing with one another nicely. And for me, I started to realize like at the end of 2023, I was like, okay, these publishers have kind of come to me. Well, first of all, because I was one publisher guy for so long, um, when that all kind of blew up, I had multiple people reach out to me and say, "Come here, come do your stuff here," which was really nice. It was like because I was kind of like, I'm done. Like this is
Mhm.
crazy. Like I've sort of lost the rights to a bunch of different stuff, and now it's all stuck in bankruptcy court. So I was like, I don't know where to go from here. And then I had a bunch of people kind of come forward and say, no, no, you should come here and do your stuff
Mhm.
here. And so I started to like look at the calendar and I was just transparent with them. I said, look, I'm talking to this publisher and I've got this thing coming out in April. So I think we should launch this book in this month,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So like they were all aware of the situation and then they were all making sure that they were not cannibalizing each other's launches. And also for me, it's like then I can also market stuff
Mhm.
properly in a way that isn't like destroying my life. So it was like it was eye-opening. I think this past year has been really good for my perspective because like again, talking about kind of getting thrown into the deep end early, like Aftershock was a publisher that came to us pretty much right after our first book came out and said, you should just do all your stuff here. And there's a benefit for like you because when people look at the shelf, they're going to find your stuff all the same publisher. And I thought, ah, that makes sense. Like, and you don't really think about it that much more than that
Mhm.
because like you're new to it and these were early on and like, so like we signed a 3 book deal with them that sort of locked us into doing a bunch of our creator own work there. And I didn't really think about that at the time because you
Mhm.
just go, wow, like someone wants me to do 3 books. This is great. And then you sort of like look at it in the rearview mirror and you realize like there was a degree of uh taking advantage of how green we
Mhm.
were,
Mhm.
basically. And like um I don't even really have any bad blood about that because
Yeah.
like I didn't do my due diligence and talk to other people and sort of like really look into it. And I'm happy and I'm proud of all the work that I made there. And so it prepared me for this moment where I'm like, now I'm not going to be locked down anywhere. I'm just going to keep doing stuff everywhere. And I think that James Tynion thing really stuck in my head of like, you do want to use them
Yeah.
to your best advantage to have them play well with each other.
It's not like you sat here and was like, oh, this 3 book deal, I'm gonna sign with this company and they're gonna go bankrupt. It's not like in
Well,
our
yeah,
minds
yeah,
we're gonna be like,
yeah.
oh, this is gonna suck because outside of the spreading your love through a bunch of different comic book publishers, it's a good thing. But yeah, it's like no one signs on with the company thinking that they're not gonna be there anymore. It's even if the writing's on the wall, it's still not in your mind that you're just like, this they want to publish my book. This is great. And I think there's other publishers out there where there's some books on these publishers, right? They shouldn't be working with these publishers. Some of these like kind of more sketchy publishers nowadays that people just hopefully that their book gets out there and they're happy that someone's making their book. And it's a fine line to walk. But we're working with someone like Dark Horse right now and Boom and Oni and some of these other bigger publishers or these long-term publishers. Now you only have to lose 1 book if one decides to go
Yeah,
out.
yeah, yeah.
Well, we have multiple books now at these things, some of these publishers. But yes, in the long run, obviously you don't know. But is there any hope for any of this stuff that from Aftershock that you're ever gonna get some of this back, or is this just basically like in your mind you're just like that's the past, we're moving forward with new stuff?
So like I'm I'm pretty diligent in that I like
Okay,
I'm on top of it, like
okay,
in that I'm paying attention to the bankruptcy courts and everything like that. And so there's some sliver of hope that's kind of coming through now, but I think the thing to keep in mind is that like this has been going on for 18
yeah,
months. That's a very long time for anything to sort of be in bankruptcy
yeah,
court. Um, So the interesting wrinkle of all of this is that because creators own half the rights, Aftershock's sort of in a situation where they cannot sell those rights to anyone else without the creator's
yeah,
authorization. And obviously the creators don't want that, right? So the only thing the creators want is to get their rights sold back to them. So like I've been very clear with them. They'll never publish another book of mine. I will not finish things out
Yeah.
there. But if they give me the rights back, we'll go right to Dark Horse and be like, hey, or
Yes.
wherever,
Yes.
And so like I just want my library back, and I think
Yeah.
that's what most creators want. But there's like with everything, right? They're just sort of like trying to find an angle that works for them, and I
Yeah.
think the court is running out of patience. Let's just put it that way.
No, yeah, I can answer that because there was. I mean, we've heard with other publishers, we've heard things recently where they're just like they've got some bad blood, some bad news in the internet, and people were just like they just said, okay, have your rights back. Like we're just going to move on from this, and so that would have been a nice
Yeah,
thing to be able to say, just like okay, but obviously they're financially not doing well, so
no,
that's what the mix of that is. But yeah, it sucks. But you know what? It's one of those things that like a lot of people will go, then you should have just kickstarted it all, and you would have had it all your all that stuff. But no,
yeah,
but yes, I've all the publishers that you've worked with. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Dark Horse, huge fan of Mad Cave. I feel like they're doing a bunch of great things over at Mad Cave.
yeah,
I
yeah,
love
they
all
really
the
are.
people over at Dark Horse. They are absolutely wonderful. Obviously, things for Boom in the horizon now we see with them being sold. It could be different in the future, but we don't know. But as of right now, it's great, and so it's great to see your books at these places. But Dark Horse is absolutely tremendous, and I'm glad that Into the Unbeing is under the Dark Horse banner. I feel like it's a huge Dark Horse title. I feel like that, I just feel the Dark Horse logo on the front of that book just like fits.
Yeah,
And I've seen online and I've read some things about you saying that this is the most personal story and work that you've been doing. Into the Unbeing. It launched. We're on. I think this is going to drop on the 14th of August, so that would be the third issue coming out
yep, yep,
on the day that this drops, and then the fourth one comes on September 11th. And it's part one, right? I mean, this is you're doing more with this, but we're
yeah,
three issues
yeah.
in. This is a story. I don't know. I hate elevator pitches, but if you want to give us an idea of what Into the Unbeing is before we get into a discussion about a little bit about the book.
Yeah, so it's about a team of scientists that are stationed in the Australian outback who find a cosmic anomaly, and they enter the anomaly through its mouth, the mouth being in quotation marks, but not really because, spoiler, if you haven't read issue one, they go into the mouth of a giant undead kaiju-like creature thing
Yes.
that exists in the desert.
It's so with that being said, and I kind of have an idea, but I'd like to hear out of your mouth saying this, but why is this the most personal work that you've done?
So, I mean, there's a number of reasons, but
Okay.
like first and foremost, when we were originally conceiving this book, I was in the process of like moving across Canada. Um, and when I started to sort of like journal what I wanted this book to be and what I wanted to be about, I strongly sort of like believe that climate change is the like most pressing issue that faces humanity in the next, like 10, 20, 30, 100 years.
Mhm.
And that was always sort of part of my personality, but I camped my way across the entire country of Canada, and Canada is a giant country.
Mhm.
And the first few nights that I did that, uh, I drove through a forest that was on fire to the point where like ash was coming through my AC unit in my car, and like you can't see the sun, and like I'm talking I was on the highway and there were trees on fire like 10 feet from the car. I could feel the heat kind of thing, and I was in the mountains and I had no other route to go. I just had to go through the forest fire. And um and then I saw a flood like halfway through my journey. I saw all kinds of different sort of environmental like hazards or catastrophes or whatever, and kind of just in this moment realized how normalized these things are and how much we're getting used to them. And then fast forward to 2022, I get to my new home
Yeah.
and I'm here for about a year, and then a Category 5 hurricane hit the island, and like it was devastating. Like there were so many trees that came down. I remember like laying in my house in the hallway with my back on the wood floor, and you can feel the vibrations of the trees falling down as they're hitting the ground and like through. and then the power goes out and the radio stops working, and you sort of just like go, okay, this is sort of normal now. Like, the West Coast is on fire, the East Coast gets hammered by hurricanes, and these are just things that we're supposed to like get used to. But there's also just nothing really being done. And so I just wanted to really write about coming to grips with that sort of like reality, but also talking about how there's so many different perspectives that people have on this, and all these different ways for people to enter and into thinking about the environment, and realizing that they're sort of inseparable from the environment. They're not sort of this like, humans aren't just this removed creature that sort of lords over nature. We're an integral part of it. And I wanted to sort of showcase that there's all kinds of different perspectives that you can have on this. And so that's why the series is written through all these different perspectives, because the hope is that when you sort of like finish the series, you sort of realize you kind of been looking through a prism, and there's all these different perspectives on this one thing.
it, was there a fine, like, obviously this book is fiction, obviously comic book is not a, you're talking about, again, spoilers, the first issue's been out for a little while, so I don't want to spoil too much about it, but you were talking about going into a giant head, and so obviously there is no giant head in wilderness here in on Earth. What was the decision, or how hard was it to walk the line between trying to tell a true climate change style story, that bases that has a little hits close to home, but also having a supernatural and fiction part of it? Like, how was that line, like, telling and trying to be like, no, climate change is real, people, and then also being like, but this is also a comic book. Like, was that a difficult thing, or was it something that really just came to you?
It's something that kind of came pretty naturally. Like, I
Okay.
think, like I've for a while there when I was living on the West Coast, like I was pretty into like backcountry camping. And so the idea is like you go in and everything is on your back, and
Mhm.
it's got to be like ultra light. And what ends up happening is you go like, you look at it on a map and you go, okay, I understand where I'm going, and like what that's going to feel like when I get there. But then when you walk up a mountain and you kind of get there and you're in the environment and your phone doesn't work and you're just there with your gear, you may as well be in the mouth of a
Mhm.
giant undead being, right? Because at the end of the day, like I kept thinking every time I would go backcountry camping, and you'd have this period where you'd be like bouldering, which is like when you walk on all these jagged rocks to try and scale something. And you would think to myself, I'm by myself, one wrong step, I twist my ankle, I fall down in there, and that's it. Like I'm just down there now. And like I don't and like I have no way to contact help. I have like some rescue gear or whatever, but at the end of the day, like the amount of people who go missing and die in the Canadian wilderness is astronomically high. So I kind of just was thinking about like, you know, this feeling of getting lost in nature
Mhm.
um, is a pretty common feeling. And so if you sort of like extrapolate that and put that into like a really fantastical environment, I think that's the easiest way to help people understand that feeling who maybe don't do that sort of thing. Because I have
Mhm.
lots of friends who like theoretically can understand what it's like to be out in the woods and be completely immersed in nature, but maybe have never done it. And so
Mhm.
like it is a weird moment of like insignificance. You're just sort of like, oh wow, I don't matter at all. I'm like I could just disappear and the world would go on, right? And so I wanted to sort of make sure that readers were confronting something that made them feel cosmically insignificant.
And it does. It works extremely well on that. It's also a visually appealing, or not appealing, but it's appealing, but like depressing comic book, because the artwork is absolutely phenomenal. That matches, pairs up really well with your writing style, and it definitely shows some sort of depressing outlook and some scary
Yeah.
outlook onto what the world could look like, and will look like if we don't do something about it, in a sense. Um, but yeah, it's in the color scheme as well, gives me that like depressing, but the it's hard to explain. Um, it just fits well in my opinion. I don't know how else to say it when I was reading it. I was reading it for the first time, and it's one of those things that there's certain books. So first of all, I'm a huge fan of your writing. So like the first thing
Thank
that
you.
comes out when I see a Zac Thompson book, it's like, okay, I got to pay attention to this book, and then it's on top of that because there are some people who write all over the board, and I'm like, oh, I like your writing, but this is not my favorite comic book. So I have to look at it. Then the Dark Horse thing. Okay, I love Dark Horse. Honestly, to tell you, the part one drew me in, the idea that like, okay, this could
Nice.
be, there's more to this because it's not just, it's nice to know. I like miniseries a lot. I'm a big miniseries fan because of the fact that I like a beginning and an end. I like a concise story. I like the idea that, too many times I've actually seen recently, which was like, we've got, promoted to an ongoing. And then like 7 issues in, they're like, okay, it's their final issue. I'm like, wait a second. But I
Yeah.
thought you were going to an ongoing. And to have this be a point where like, I'm guessing that at the end of part one, it probably can be, we're not going to do any more, except it would look kind of weird if you just did part one. It'd be like History of the World part one. You'd be like, I just got you guys. No, but the idea that having it be part one drew me in. The cover drew me in, cover A of the first issue, and then reading the story, it was just phenomenal. And again, I love these stories that are based in truth with a twist that makes it so it's not, if that makes any sense. And I think that's what Into the Unbeing is that has that everything in it could be real except for that this supernatural part of it. And that to
Yeah.
me, again, it just makes it a little less depressing when you go to read it. We are reading comic books to kind of escape the
Yeah.
world we live in, and you put me into the world we live in with this comic book. But yeah, there's that. And then honestly, to me, with the first issue was the that cliffhanger of an ending to a point where I'm like, oh shit, now I really need to get issue two, and find out what's going on with this series. But it's a complete package in my opinion with this book, and if anybody hasn't read it yet, I think it's well worth taking a gander at. One of the notes I actually wrote down when I was reading the book originally for the first time, and I don't remember the exact lines in the comic book. I'll have to go back and read it, but I put down that people still care about what people think about us, even in the end of times. Like it's kind of funny
Yeah.
how some of your characters are so different in this book, but there's like moments where they're just like they care what people think about, even though the world is shit on the outside of the vehicle they're in, but they're still worried about what someone else thinks about them. Is kind of like how stupid of humans we are.
Yeah, I mean, and it doesn't matter what you're doing or what situation you're in, right? You're gonna be like, like, what do these other people think of me? And I think like, yeah, because it's like it doesn't matter, right? Like we kind of reduce ourselves down to those like petty sort of
Yes.
human emotions so often. And like, like to go back to like the part one of it
Mm,
all, like
mm,
um when Hayden and I kind of first came to Dark Horse, because like Hayden and I have been basically building this together from the
okay.
very beginning. I pitched this to Hayden and they were very interested from the get-go. And I was like, look, here are the things that sort of scare me about what's going on currently. How do you feel about them? And they felt very similarly. They were very worried about the climate and everything. So we started to talk about what we could build that sort of was like unique and interesting visually. And they were like, you know what? I want to paint this book. I want to like go in and I want to paint my own work. I've never done that before, and I want this to be like the book where I color myself.
Mhm.
I was like, hell yeah, sounds great. So we went to Dark Horse. We had 5 pages completely made that were, like lettered by Jim, painted by Hayden. And um, on the 5th page, they were already inside
Mm,
in the original pitch. And we said to them, like, look, we see this as like at least 8 oversized issues, like
mm,
about 250 pages was sort of what we pitched them. And because everyone else we had talked to said, make it a 4 issue mini. And we were like, that's just not like we just can't do that with a concept like this. So either you take it as a 250-page behemoth or you don't take it at all. And so when we were sort of pitching it to Dark Horse, we were about like halfway through issue 1, and I was already writing like issue 4, and I said like I think there's an area here in issue 4 where we could break it, and this could be part 1, and then we could do a part 2. And Dark Horse, to their credit, because of like Hellboy and everything,
yeah.
Dark Horse readers are so used to interconnected minis, and they were like, okay, but like if you did that, should they have different titles? And I was like, no, fuck it. Let's just do
Yes.
let's do Dune style, just part one, because then it immediately tells you there's a part two coming. Because
Hmm.
I didn't want there to be like a subtitle that was too vague to evoke like, oh, is this just sort of a mini? Because I think, you just don't want to get readers to a place where they read four issues and then they don't know that like the
Hmm.
next mini came out. And then of course, now that we've completely finished part two, um, we're already talking about what we could do for part three because it's just like we, and it has a very definitive ending,
Yeah.
but we walked away from it and went, oh, we could come back here and we could do a little bit more with what we've sort of left on the table here. And the idea, um, for this whole series really has been like an exercise in generative world building where like every morning while we were working on the book, because we're completely done now,
Hmm.
um, Hayden would send like a rough layout and say, "What do you think of this? This is page one, issue one." I'd be like, "Okay, cool. Like, panel one, let's do this, that, or the other thing." And they would be like, "Okay." And then they would, at the end of the day, send me inks. And we would do that every day for like basically 3 years. And that was cool because I would wake up every morning and Hayden and I would have a conversation and we would figure out a page. And then at the end of the day, I would get that page. And I've never made a book like that. It's usually like you get a batch of 20 pages at a time, you approve them, and then 3 weeks' time, you think about the book again.
Hmm.
So every single day we were talking about this. So it really just evolved. And we let it sort of go in these like strange and uncanny directions. And it was very like jazz like in that way, where it was just sort of like we were just rolling with it. And Hayden has been an unbelievable collaborator in that like they're, one of the best artists working in comics
Hmm.
today, so incredibly skilled. And every time I would give them something that was insane, they would send me something back 10 times crazier because they were just like challenge accepted, like, and so it was really fun because that was like that's comics at their best where you're
Hmm.
just sort of like bouncing off of each other and trying to outdo each other to the point where like, like the thing that's interesting is like issue one was written in 2021, issue four was written in 2024 and drawn in 2024. So both of those things, like, by the time you get to the end of the part two, like basically 4 years of creative time have elapsed. So like I've become a better writer, I hope,
Hmm.
and Hayden's absolutely become a better artist. So like the book just gets more visually interesting and uh creatively daring, I think, as it goes on.
It's the 4 year process. Are you like, is it been exciting, relieving, indifferent on now having it be on shelves and in people's hands and actually having people outside of like friends in the industry reading it?
Yeah, I mean, it was I was like it's just very surreal to be honest with you because we've been working on it for so long that like when you see people posting photos and stuff of it, you're like, oh man, like wow, like
Yeah.
that's existed in my head for so long that now it's finally like out there and people are engaging with it in this really like wonderful way because I honestly like that's what it's all about, right? Is
Yeah.
like that because at some point in time when you're working on a project for that long, you go, well, this is probably just never going to come out. I
Yeah.
never see the light of day. Like you're just like waiting for the publisher to be like, yeah, we're canceling it.
Yes.
It's so like it was really lovely because it was just like such a labor of love for
Hmm.
for Hayden and I. And like it was this type of thing that we just had to work on between other gigs and like, Hayden's exploded in the time
Hmm.
that since we started on the book. So they were like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go work on Absolute Wonder Woman now." And I was like, "Hell yeah, like kill it," like but it's just sort of this thing where I'm so happy that we were able to come together when we did and tell this story because it just sort of feels like all these things kind of came together perfectly to make this book.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's beautiful, and it shows. It's one of those things that I don't think that the peripheral. This is not me putting down peripheral readers, like people who just read occasionally and don't pick up a bunch of things on their pull list, but like it shows in someone when you're reading a book, and I'm reading it as a person trying to critique the book, that you guys look like you cared about working with each other. Like there's definitely
Yeah.
times, and especially in big two books, is a lot of times you're paired up or partnered with someone that you don't get a choice on who that person is. A lot of times they're just like, okay, Zach, you're writing it, and so and so is doing the art. But it showed like throughout the first two issues that you guys cared about working together and that the project was a team effort. And it showed that. Hearing you say that makes sense, and that's why I love when that shows like that. There's definitely and Jim Campbell's no slouch here in your lettering department
No,
here.
not at
So
all.
like
No.
so you have that whole team there. And again, like I mentioned about the whole editing and publishing over at Dark Horse, this book just feels complete, even though I said I've only read two issues. It feels like it's complete and it's at a place that it needs to be. And I think that's what's great about this first part one, I should say, of Into the Unbeing. It just seems like it makes sense. I don't know how else to explain it.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, Jim Campbell for sure. Everybody who know who Jim Campbell is. Jim Campbell is a letterer, designer who's extraordinaire. That's just and you can tell again, lettering. I've said it a million times on this podcast, but lettering is one of those unsung heroes in the comic book industry that it can be really bad and it can be
Yeah.
really good. And I think that really good, it stands out in a way that you're like, oh, this lettering is really good. But it just good lettering means that it just sits there on the page like it belongs there. And I think that's what Jim did a wonderful job on this
Yeah.
book.
I think he was gonna like murder me when I gave him the plans because I was like, okay, so every single issue is going to have a prose passage that we
Yes.
want lettered differently and from a different style. And then every single issue also changes perspective. So we need to do some sort of visual cue so it's clear that the narrator has changed every issue. And he was just like, okay, Zach, great. And he's been along for the multiple year ride as well,
Yeah.
because he did that pitch with us
Okay.
right in 2020. So like he's been an integral part of the team and honestly has elevated everything that he's touched.
And you mentioned the whole like five people to make a comics. You shrunk that down with Hayden doing both the
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
illustrations and the coloring, and then having Jim and you. So now there's a smaller team on that. Not mentioning your editor and so on and so forth at Dark Horse. But yeah, that team is very small when you have someone who does all of the artwork. Uh, you know,
Yeah.
just get Hayden. If you didn't have Jim, you have Hayden do the lettering too, and you'd be all set. It's
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, exactly.
But I
Yeah.
have heard from people like so. My buddy Joseph Schmalke was like, yeah, he tried to letter some of his books, and he's like, screw this. I'll do the artwork, I'll write, I'll color, I'll do all that stuff, but someone else can letter. I don't have the time or the ability to letter right now.
Honestly, it's the thing, it's like it looks easy, right?
Yeah.
When it's done well, it looks easy. But if you try and do it, and I recommend that people try because I tried
Mhm.
to letter my own stuff early on, it's gonna look like shit. And then
Yes.
you're gonna realize that you should take a step back and you should pay a professional to do it.
Yes.
Or put in the time to learn how to do it
Yes.
professionally. But like the reality is that, you know, it should look effortless because when it is done well, it just guides your eye around the page and you don't even have to think about it. And that's why I think people think it's easy to do, but it's absolutely not.
I also believe that there's also a position for this. It's a comic book position. It's a person you
Yeah,
hire is a letterer. So there's a reason behind that. It's not just because they want to have another title in a book. It's because the people who do it are professionals at doing it, and that's what they're good at. And
yes,
so,
yeah,
you're not sitting here illustrating your own books because you're like, I'll just write. I'll let someone else
yeah,
draw the books. You don't want to see my drawing or whatever, but like someone else can draw them in the same sense. And some people don't like to color their own stuff. They're like, I'd rather just do the illustrations, let someone else color it,
exactly.
and and so on
Yeah,
and so forth. So there's a position there because it's worth it. And there's names you see out there. If anybody sees like Jim Campbell's one of them. DC did your Blow Away, right? Is that DC
yeah,
Hopkins?
yeah.
And DC's one of my favorite letterers of all time too. So you got some stellar people there as well. Um, into the Unbeing is an absolute phenomenal book. I think people need to read it for sure. You can get the first issue. Hopefully, it's sold out. But like, if you can get it at your local comic book shop, pick that up. It's a beautiful, beautiful cover, creepy cover, but beautiful cover. And then issue two just hit, and issue three is hitting when this episode drops. Issue four will be out in September. And then I'm guessing, obviously, Dark Horse does some pretty good trades, so you'll have a trade of it as well in part one. Are you going to do a trade of part one, you think, and then a trade of part two, or is it going to be? Do you
Yeah.
know? You don't know?
So trade of part one will be out. Uh I don't know when part two is going to hit, but it's going to be
Yeah.
early 2025, but the trade will be out before that. So the
Okay.
idea is that like if you miss part one, you can read it in trade, and then you can be ready for part two when that drops.
That's awesome. See, and I'm a big floppy kind of guy, so people should pick up floppies. But it's hard sometimes. The book is popular and purchased a lot. It's hard to
Yeah,
find the issues one sometimes. So it's one of those things. According to bookshop.org, it looks like early January or January is when the trade should hit. So right
perfect.
around that beginning of the year thing. What I did realize with your books this year in 2024, I'm a big Project Riese fan, by the way, too. I love that
Oh,
book over at
nice.
Mad Cave
Awesome.
last year. It's funny. It's funny is I think the used Previews World or Boom used my pull quote for Hunt for the Skinwalker in previews, as well as I was pull quoted from the back of Project Riese. So I feel like
Hell yeah.
like it's like when I see these like things and like Kyle Starks, I'm a big Kyle Starks fan too, and two of his books last year they used my pull quote, and I was just thinking to myself, I'm like, people are gonna start knowing who my favorite writers are when you start seeing all the no. But yeah, so what I realized this year is that your four books that you put out, the big books that you put out from the different publishers, they're all drastically different art styles. And I feel like
Yeah.
in books in general, but I'm just saying like when you look at visual of a book with Blow Away, it's a little bit cleaner, and you've got this one obviously, and then obviously coming out with the trade, the body trade with Jock. I mean, that's like they're all different. Is this on purpose, or is this just something that it happened to be?
Yeah, definitely on purpose. I
Okay.
definitely wanted to give people, well, first of all, like I just like writing for different sort of art styles because it makes you write differently. Like
Mm,
I think like at the end of the day, like I don't write the same way for Jock as I do for Nicola on
yeah.
Blow Away. And the idea is like to kind of challenge yourself, step outside of your comfort zone, but also like I think like you don't want everything to kind of have this visual sameness
Mm,
either. Um, because like one of the things that I think is really important is like beyond working with the artist who's perfect for your story, I also think like art sets a tone right away. So like when you open a book and you look at the art, it's just going to give you a different feel depending, right? So like one of Blow Away, I wanted to feel clean and have like a more quote unquote like modern style
mm,
for it because I think it's just like a very modern story. And
yeah.
whereas like Jock has like really heavy blacks and sort of like very nimble line work, almost like
Hmm.
Mignola-esque. And I thought, this is a darker, grittier revenge story.
Yeah.
He'd be perfect for that. And so it's finding the right sort of tone, I think, for the thing that you're trying to create.
It makes sense. I mean, you've also worked for some stellar artists. I mean, having a body trade come out with Jock is absolutely phenomenal. Not to mention, we just mentioned with Hayden with Into the Unbeing. Some of these artists you're working with are phenomenal in their own right as well. But yeah, I think the Blow Away one too has that like it's cold, so like has that smoothness to it, in a sense,
Yeah.
softness to it because of the fact that it's obviously a snowy climate. And then yeah, with the body trades coming out in September
Yep.
from Mad Cave, which is their 10th anniversary, which is kind of cool to have a book come out during their 10th anniversary over there. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's also a story that is it Jock's artwork in general, whether you're writing the story or not writing the story, but the actual plot of the story. I feel like Jock's artwork gives this grittiness to it that this story deserves. And I
Yeah.
think that that's why I feel like when I was reading it last night, that it was like it just made sense to have Jock as the some people can take Jock or leave him. Like it's like one of those things that some people aren't their biggest fans.
Yeah.
Like it's definitely an issue for some people. But otherwise, I mean, it's a phenomenal first issue, debut issue here called The Body Trade. What is The Body Trade for quickly so we can get into that a little just tiny bit before we
Sure.
get off here?
So it follows a divorced ex-con who finds out that his estranged son has passed away and that his remains have been sold into the body trade, which is an aftermarket for human corpses that actually exists in America and many people don't actually know about. So I found out about the aftermarket for human corpses and decided to write a crime book about it following kind of like a hardened, no nonsense, violent dude with a broken arm as he sort of navigates this world because I wanted to sort of like write an angrier, sort of more propulsive crime story
Mm-hmm.
that's not driven by interior narration at all, but is just driven by action.
Mm-hmm. It's the first issue is packed with some anger, some violence, some shouting.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
it's kind of funny that not funny, but it's makes sense because he is a hardened person, this father, and so on and so forth. You can understand why this person's hardened. They have gone through some shit in life, probably prior to the son passing away, during this whole passing away of the son, and then having to learn that his son was sold into the body trade. But also he has a heart. Like you can tell that he has a heart as well. And so like it's
Yeah.
not just this badass, nonsense person, but the person is doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Maybe it's redemption, maybe because he screwed up earlier in life that he wants to make sure things are right and so on. So you can feel that in it. But having that, I love that juxtaposition of having this guy that looks like he just kicked your ass, but also being like, if he was in the right mindset at the time, probably could cuddle up with his son if his son hadn't passed away.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason he cries in the first scene,
Yeah.
right? Like I wanted to sort of like immediately undercut that idea of like manhood because I think like that's something that doesn't often get written about in comics a lot is like we have like a lot of like, the Conan
Hmm.
archetype or whatever, but I think there's an interesting degree of like fragile masculinity that we don't often write comics about. And I think there's like, you can look the part and you can embody the part, but at the end of the day, it's like, are you able to be vulnerable and
Hmm.
sort of do something? The whole book is asking the question of like, can you just sort of can a bad person redeem
Hmm.
themselves for being a shitty person in the past? And as the book goes on, you start to learn more about Kim is the main character, sort of how he was sort of responsible
Hmm.
for some of this, right? And so like why he's so invested in making this right. And also, is he capable of making it right? Is he just making a bigger mess, like
Yeah.
and that's oftentimes like when you're driven by revenge is not clean, right? It's sort of like it oftentimes leaves you with a bigger wound than the one that you're trying to fill.
Yeah, and so like you mentioned online about having it out there and stuff like that, and I was like, oh yeah, I usually get Mad Cave stuff a little early, but this is actually a little earlier than I would get potentially Mad Cave stuff, and I was like, oh, I'm super
Yeah.
excited to read this because obviously, like I said, I'm a huge fan of yours, and so and then I saw Jock on there, I'm like, I got to read this book and see what this is all about. I'm super pumped. I'm a father, so it obviously hits a little bit hard
Yeah.
for me too, just seeing that. Like, I can't imagine the loss of my son, no matter what's going on in my mind or what was going on in my life. It would just suck. And this weekend was kind of it was fitting to it because because of the COVID that we had COVID and we were sick for a while. I had to be home 24 hours because I get this. I hate to say it. I'm a father, but I could never be a stay-at-home dad. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
this like going to my work, talking to some adults, being away from my kid for a little
Yeah.
bit, letting someone else
Yeah,
take
fair
care of
enough.
him, but then coming home one night and being very attentive to my son and being there and over the weekends and doing things with him and so on and so forth. I absolutely love him. I read him books before he goes to bed and all that stuff. But on Sunday or Saturday afternoon, he was not listening, and I raised my voice a little louder than I ever wanted to, and it hurt me so bad as a dad. I
Yeah.
just like I should not have done that. I apologized to him. I was teary eyed a little bit, and I hugged him. And then I read this book, and I'm like, "Fuck you, Zac." No, no, but like it was true, and it made sense. And I never have ever had stuff in my life. When I was growing up, when I was living in Massachusetts for a number of years, a friend of mine couldn't watch certain movies because he's a father, and he's like, I can't do it. I've always been able to separate fake versus real, and the idea that like the movie we were talking about at the time was Prisoners with Hugh Jackman.
Oh
I don't know
yeah.
if you ever see
Yeah.
it. And he's like, the kid gets abducted. I just can't even think about it. So on and so forth. I'm like, but I know it's fake. I know it's not real. And so I was
Yeah.
able to separate myself, but it still strikes a chord differently. It's
Sure.
I don't own a pet, but you have a pet, right? I guess you have a dog.
Yeah, I have a dog and two cats, yeah.
Okay, and so like being something that like something happens bad to a dog or a cat, I can imagine someone being a pet owner being like, yeah, this is not fun for me to read. And the
Yeah,
same thing. So
man.
like having someone lose a kid and then have the ability to try to be like, I screwed up and I want to redeem myself. I kind of hit home on Sunday night with this
Yeah.
reading this book. So I'm excited to read the rest of it. And hopefully people won't be turned off by the fact that if you're a parent, you shouldn't be reading this, but you should be reading it. I don't want to deter
Yeah, I
anybody from
mean
reading it.
it really is about redemption, right? It
Yeah.
is about trying to be like the kind of thing that I pitched Mad Cave to was like it's never too late to be a good person. You know what I mean? Even if you are a bad person with the right goal can become a good person. And like there's something interesting there. I just love stories like that. I love
Mhm.
like really morally gray, protagonists who sort of like, obviously have a strong emotional reason for why they're doing what they're doing, but they're also like willing to break people's arms or faces in order to like get what they want. There's something interesting there. Because I mean, everyone's been through that, right? Where you're
Yeah.
sort of faced with like this injustice or this thing that is like just doesn't make sense, and you're on the losing end of it, and you
Mhm.
just sort of wanna like find who's responsible and make them pay, right?
Yeah.
But it's like most of us don't do that. Most of us just go, well, fuck, I guess I'll
Yeah.
just go back to my life,
It's, it's yeah. It's also it's a tough thing to deal with when no one else around you believes in you from the beginning too. So
Yeah,
like, he's looking for this. He goes to the funeral at the very beginning and that's where he finds out. Obviously, it's the very beginning of the book, so I'm not spoiling anything. It's
yeah,
literally like the first two
yeah,
pages. But yeah, he finds out that his son is no longer, it's not actually his son in the casket or something like that. And he wants, it seems like he wants to make a difference, but everybody around him's like, screw you. You haven't been
yeah,
here,
like
yada, 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 yada.
get
What
out
have
of
you done
here. Yeah,
lately? And it's like, okay, well, he doesn't mean he's, forgiven and move on from everything, but give the guy an opportunity to really try to make a difference here. But yeah, and it's like you can see both. I don't believe obviously in the idea of a body trade and having a corpses illegal, illegitimate corpses being sold on the black market and stuff like that. But like you also see where they came from and why they may have done what they've done, the rest of his family, to do certain things. So like it puts people also on the other side of that vulnerable position to do something they shouldn't do, to get
yeah.
themselves out financially or so on and so forth. So
Yeah, because I mean
yeah.
it is real, and like
Hmm.
there is a predatory nature to some of it, but there's also like the flip side of it is like, if you get your leg amputated after you die and that gets
Yeah.
sold to a medical conference and they put like a knee plate on it to
Yeah.
show doctors how to do that properly, like that's
Hmm.
holistically good. But as you'll learn as you read the series, there's no federal law that regulates the aftermarket for human corpses. So I, if I was American, could move to the States
Hmm.
and get a refrigerated truck, start collecting corpses, and start selling them. And I don't need a license to do that. So like, like if that's not American capitalism, I don't know what is.
Oh God, yeah, that's not great. I remember actually, I think about corpses. I remember when I was living in Massachusetts, it's about 10, maybe 15 years ago. They did a special body exhibit at the like Museum of Science where they took like these people donated their corpses, their after they died, to science, and they like put some sort of plastic thing in it, like it was actually human beings, and they like took hearts out and like it was crazy. It was insane. But
Very cool.
that's cool. That's
Yeah.
that's like teaching people about things. This is not trying to sell a toe to someone because they need it and they can't afford to go get
Yeah.
it themselves or so on, or make some extra money on the side. But yeah, I don't, no, that's not fun. But which is obviously a completely different, it's a important book, but a different book from Into the Unbeing, and the same thing with Blow Away and Cemetery Kids Don't Die. Those are all four books that came out this year. But quickly, I want to talk because we're coming towards the end here. You First of all, I want to say the one thing I do love about Zac is the fact that you can tell that you love comics. And you're excited and you don't take for granted that you're writing comics and you get to publish comics, that people get to buy your comics. I feel like when you see you on social media and you see things, you're not just being like, buy my comic, this is another comic out. You're like, this comic means a lot to me, or I've worked hard for this comic, or I'm so excited to do this. And one of those is Alien. It seems like
Yeah.
you're a fan of Alien, and then you're excited
Yeah.
to do this, and you wrote this. Is it a prequel to the Alien movie that's coming up? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, so I got a call from Marvel at the beginning of this year basically, and they were like, "Hey, I'm sure you know the new Alien movie's coming out. Would you like to work with the director in creating a prequel to it?" So over the last year, I've been working with Fede Alvarez um to basically come up with a prequel to the new film.
Mhm.
So you know, I know what happens in this new movie and I know how my story ties into it. And I'm so excited for people to see it because it's just like, for me, I'm a huge fan of the franchise. And I think this is like a huge return to form and is everything that we've wanted as fans for a really long time. And I can't really say anything about the
Mhm.
plot of what I've written because Like it's so spoilery that it's coming out in October when the movie comes out like
Yeah.
on August 16th.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for it. When you see the movie, then I'll be able to start talking about what the comic is about. But it's basically Marvel has said it's shining the light on the film's antagonists. That's all we can really say.
Hmm.
But it is an integral part of alien lore that they asked me to sort of fill in the blanks on, and I was like beside myself. And like the cool thing is with a lot of these things, you kind of wonder, oh, hey, how involved was this director or whatever? Was this just sort of like a thing where they just sort of sent you an idea? Fede spoke to me multiple times. We had multiple calls. One time got on a Zoom call with me for 3 hours and just walked me through the movie, walked me through the script, showed me like large portions of the film while I'm talking to him on it on Zoom, and
Hmm.
then also gave me notes on every step of the process. So like I was sending him my outline, he was sending me notes back. I sent him my script, he sent me notes back, that sort of thing. Because there's also just some key elements that we had to make sure gelled properly because yeah, it's like a piece of alien canon. So it really needed to make we needed to make sure that it made sense, but also
Hmm.
just like was very generous in allowing me to be creatively involved in this process. So yeah, I mean, I've just been beside myself and I've had to keep this secret for a really long time. So it's really nice that it's out in the world because I've
Yeah.
been like dying, like I went into the coffee shop like 3 weeks ago and I had an alien shirt on and the guy was like, "Do you think that new movie's gonna be good?" And I was like, yeah, it looks cool. And then in the back of my head, I'm like, you already know, but you can't say anything. So
Yes.
you just have
Yes.
to
Yep.
like get out of here as fast as possible so you
Yep.
don't blow those secrets. So I was just like, bye. And then like a couple weeks later, I see him again and he was like, "You bastard." Like you
Yes.
knew. And I was like, yeah, but I couldn't say
You
anything
say
because it
anything,
wasn't,
yeah.
yeah. So
Because
it's just
when you
like,
left, he's like, obviously, why is that guy wearing? The guy is wearing an alien shirt because he thinks it's cool. He doesn't care about
yeah,
alien.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Pretty
amazing.
funny.
But I guess, and that's one of those things that like I talked to David Boer when David did the Back in Town, Ghostbusters Back in Town mini series that
Yeah.
came out, which was a prequel to the latest Ghostbusters movie. And it's someone who has a passion for Ghostbusters. This is like one of those things that I've had a discussion with Heather Antos about Star Trek and Star Wars, and I've had it with other people who write for these like iconic, licensed properties. And it's like people are first of all, people are going to hate your comic because they're not you're not telling the alien story that they have in their head.
Yes.
And
I'm
so like
very
there's
well
that
aware.
there's that. But the truth of the matter is they don't hire people to do these comics who don't care about it. Like
Well,
they're
no,
not going to call
totally.
Zach up and be like, "Oh, so I really heard you hate the Alien franchise, so we really want you to do Alien Romulus prequel. Is that cool with you?" Like
Yeah.
you have a passion for it. You're gonna do what's best for what you think in your mind, as well as working with the director of the actual feature film, and try to do the best you guys possibly can. And it's not. This is not a, you know, random company doing this. This is a 20th Century Fox imprint of Marvel's comics. This is a legit comic book, and so this is pretty cool. And like I said, what I prefaced that with, which was the whole idea that you care, and I think that shows and is proof in the
Yeah.
proof in the pudding. And that's one reason to support some of these people. Some of these people just turn out comics because that's how they make their money. I do think that everything you have talking to you for the past hour, you have a mindset of I'm doing this because I want to do things good for the world. I also want to do good things for the comic book industry. I think it's a smart decisions to make, and so on and so forth. And in Alien Romulus, you haven't written a Marvel comic book in a couple of years, but like this is
Well,
awesome.
honestly, like I had been saying no to things and
Yeah,
sort of just been like I'm doing my own thing,
yeah,
like and then they were like, "Well, what about Alien Romulus?" And I was like, "I'm back." Like, sorry, yeah, easy. Like yeah, because it was just like I actually had told them to like a couple of years ago. I was like, I want to just take some time, work on my own stuff,
yeah.
but if Alien ever comes up with an opportunity, let me know. And I sort of just left that. And I think I sent that email in like 2022. And then they were like, yeah, so there's an
So
alien thing. Because it like to me, I never wanted to like I didn't really want to write like a 10-page story or like an eight
yeah,
page short or whatever. I really wanted to contribute something that I felt was like meaningful. So it was really incredible to kind of do this because it was like, yeah, I mean, I'm dying to tell people what it's actually about because I am like just sort of over the moon with it. Like I couldn't be more thrilled.
That's amazing. And it's great because you, again, having someone with a passion for Alien and writing comics helps Marvel and helps 20th
Oh yeah.
Century Studios because of the fact that you are promoting the book from a genuine place, not just I have a Marvel book and I want you guys all to buy it. This is like you're going to sell this book to people like it's your own creator owned property. Like,
And it feels like that. Yeah,
good.
exactly.
And and that's awesome. And having the ability to work so closely with the director is phenomenal. I do know people who have
Yeah.
written things that work with something else, and they're just like, no one, there's crickets, there's no one to be told what to do. And you
Yeah.
submit it, and they're like, yeah, but now you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this.
Yeah. I think we've
After
all
you've
been
worked so
there.
hard
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's awesome. It's like I said, you look like you're having fun, and I think that's just awesome about it. It's obviously a lot of work. It's just not, an easy industry to be in, especially right now. You always have to be working, and I think that you are a busy person. You could tell with the number of titles you have out there. I think you got a good head on your shoulders and doing the right things here, and I think that alone makes me want to buy comics from you. But anybody listening to this podcast is going to know that you're a phenomenal writer, and you've partnered up with great teams, both in artists, letters, colorists, all that stuff, and publishers. And so, I'm so glad you were able to take time out of your day from being a busy person to come on here and chat comics with us. I wanted to remind, before we sign off here, I want to remind people that Into the Unbeing is available at bookstore or comic book store shops everywhere.
Mhm.
Issue 3 comes out the day that this drops, hopefully on August 14th. Issue
Yep.
4 is September 11th. And so those
Yep.
are available at your store. And then if you're a trade waiter, make sure you go to you actually buy it at local bookstores, which is really cool. So if you don't have a comic book shop in your town, the trade will come out at the beginning of the year for that. But also the body trade, it hits FOC August 19th. Is that right?
19th. Yeah. So you'll still have
So,
time to order it
yep.
if you're listening to this. Yeah.
So grab the body trade over it's Mad Cave Studios. On that one, you can grab issue 1 that comes out in September, but FOC is the 19th. If you don't know what that means, it means it's your final order cutoff for comic book stores, so that your comic book store owner know that you want this on the shelf, and hopefully they'll put it on the shelf. With a name like yours, a name like Jock on it, I think every publisher, every comic book store should put it on the shelf, but that's just...
Hopefully, yeah.
And then, like I said, Alien Romulus, that's coming out in October. That's to be super exciting for people. Oh, issue 5 of Blow Away also is dropping, I think, this
Yeah, end of August. Yeah,
end of August. So that's this.
The 23rd.
Okay,
Yeah, I had to think about it for a second.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's coming up here pretty soon too, and then obviously that will be a trade as well. And then is Cemetery Kids Don't Die have a trade yet, or is that just...
It'll be out in December.
Okay, December. So there you go.
Yeah.
So all that stuff. So, but there's all kinds of other stuff out there. I mean, I got Project Riese over here. We got Hunt for the Skinwalker actually comes out soon too, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's out in October. The trade.
Okay,
yeah.
Because I think it was like 3 different dates that it was supposed to come out, and it hasn't come
out. Yeah. I think because of the Kickstarter stuff, it kind of got kicked down the road a little bit.
Okay, that's which is fine. But yeah, so support Zac and read all the comic books. I really appreciate you taking the time to come out and talk.
Thank you so much for having me, man.
We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Awesome.